Hello, I'm Peter Zemsky, strategy professor at INSEAD and deputy dean of the school. We're here at the Singularity University Global Summit in San Francisco to have a conversation about an increasingly hot topic, the future of learning. I'm
Nicole Wilson. I'm a cognitive psychologist by training. I am faculty here at Singularity University and often speak about future of work, future of education, future of learning, and that's me.
Look forward to learning from you.
And I'm Gary Bolles. I'm the chair for the future work with Singularity University, and also have a consulting company called Charette, focused on future of work, future of learning, and future of the organization.
So why don't you kick us off? I mean, in theory, education is supposed to be preparing people to work. So what kind of scenarios are we looking at when we prepare either leaders or just people in organizations today?
So my basic premise is that we're at as fundamental a shift as when we shifted from agricultural economies to industrial economies, and now we're shifting to what I call a digital work economy. And so if you think of it as a set of market shifts, well, how would you want things to function? So we created all these things like schools and universities and organizations and factories. In that shift to industrial economies, we're rethinking all of those institutions in this shift to a digital work economy. So that's a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous set of challenges.
What are you seeing in terms of like working with these institutions and how ready are they to change?
You know, institutions don't like to change. They function to perpetuate themselves. And so it's a huge challenge. It's hard to come into an institution and tell them, hey, you're totally irrelevant for this day and age, and you need to completely retool and perhaps, get down to nothing and start over. That's a very hard conversation to have, and I encounter a lot of resistance to that conversation. And the more deeply entrenched you are in the institutions that currently have power, the harder it is to have those conversations.
So how are you handling that at your institution?
Yes. Again, you try and build a culture where people are market focused. Just get them to understand what's happening out there in the world. It's a little bit easier with business school faculty because they teach about disruption, and it's just, again, getting them to understand that, hey, what you teach about also applies to you.
Yeah, but isn't part of it, I mean, one of the things we've seen is that the connection between, I mean, certainly when you're dealing with more graduate students and people that are actually really directly thinking they're preparing themselves for the world of work, it's a little bit of a different calculus. We've got also these K-12 schools, and we've got, so you've got, and you've got 2- and 4-year colleges. And the contract with them was that in the past, it wasn't so much about preparing you for work, it was preparing you for society and that sort of thing. So you're dealing with people a little closer to where the rubber meets the road, but educational institutions across the board were really sort of designed more for this, 3 R's kind of thing and preparing for a much less dramatically changing world of work. And now in a blindingly short period of time, we've changed the rules.
Yeah, and those goals have always been a little bit at odds, right? Do we want to build completely educated citizens with a 4-year liberal arts education that may or may not have a direct application to work, right? Or do we want to equip people with the skills they're going to need to thrive in the modern economy? And those can be at odds. And for many people, the liberal arts education is just a luxury that they can't afford. So we see a lot in emerging markets, institutions that are trying to focus equipping the students with the skills they need specifically for jobs and trying to cut out everything else that's irrelevant. And then you have institutions going the other way, that they're offering this elite privilege of a round liberal arts education.
Well, again, I mean, for me, these scenarios are really important. Are we trying to maintain the current system and run after productive work for people to keep everyone well employed? Or the other side is, hey, we're going to have such abundance, more and more people can study poetry and be that well-rounded person. I think a lot of it comes down also to how fast this is going to go.
So this is actually a conversation that I have with Peter Diamandis on abundance. I believe we already have abundance. It's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're all going to be eating bonbons and studying poetry anytime soon. We call that unemployment. So until we have a society where, certainly in America, that abundance is more evenly distributed. Instead, what you do have to do is to prepare for rapid change. So, because I always talk about the pace of change, the exponential pace of change, I focus on an acronym I call PACE. What we really need to do, sort of across the board for learners and for workers, is to have people who are problem solvers, who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. And I can detail each one of those, but the basic premise of this whole idea of what I call PACE is that we focused so much of the design of these educational systems in the past on what is often called special knowledges, or unfortunately called hard skills, that is information anchored or rooted in a particular field or industry. And what we're moving into in a world of exponential change is we have to actually completely redesign these systems. What we're teaching are the transferable skills, skills usable in a range of different situations, which we unfortunately call soft skills.
Yeah, I would add onto that the content knowledge used to be only available in these scarce locations. You had to go to the library, or you had to tap into a professor who had a specific area of expertise. Now that information is readily available to anybody who seeks it. But what the soft skills or 21st century skills are not something you can just go Google and look up. They're skills that are acquired over time through practice, and they have to be intentionally cultivated. Yeah, so you've got your PACE model, and another common one is Golinkoff and Hirsch-Pasik's 6 C's. So you've got collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity, confidence, and then content knowledge is the last one. But all of these other things are really necessary to thrive in an environment that's not totally predictable. And that's the one thing we know. We know change is coming, and we know it's a complex, dynamical system, so it can't be totally predicted. People need to be able to learn on the fly and adapt and reinvent themselves over and over again.
In terms of a soft skill, where do you think it put in the sort of the ability to learn? I've been really impressed with like what Satya did at Microsoft, really pivoting that culture to be more of a learning culture. And again, I still see that with all this change, there's lots of holes in the technology. And if you can learn quickly, there's huge opportunities you can grab, especially, again, if you can work with people and stuff.
Yeah, meta-learning or learning to learn is hugely important, and it shows up on various lists of the top skills that are going to be necessary to thrive.
And then coming back to actually how we run education, what does it take to get your faculty, your teachers at any level to actually focus on, no, I'm not teaching people content, I'm teaching people to learn?
That is a huge challenge. Faculty have come up themselves through this institution, and so they've internalized the mental framework of what that institution is and does. And it's very hard to break faculty out of that mindset and say, hey, this whole thing you've gone through years and years to master and get tenure at is now no longer relevant. It just often doesn't connect, and there's huge amounts of resistance.
Also, one of the things is, systems compete. And so to what extent is learning going to be happening, certainly at the adult level in educational institutions, versus to what extent will it be happening in companies, right? Because companies can clearly drive an advantage if they're offering people the ability to learn.
So I think the research is clear, and as we learn more and more about how our brains work and how we learn, as we have more and more technologies that can help us to be able to better understand our own skills, to be able to enhance our learning processes, I think what we're finding is learning is becoming more just in time and just in context. I mean, that's how we really do learn. We don't learn by stepping back and being told how you take the vacuum cleaner apart. We need to take the vacuum cleaner apart and hopefully put it back together again. So if you think about it from that standpoint, then my father actually wrote a book called 3 Boxes of Life years ago, and he said this model that nobody told us we were following was a big chunk of education at the beginning of our lives, and just as we learned all the rules of that box, suddenly we're thrown into the work box, and now we got to learn a whole new set of rules as sort of trial and error machines, and then leisure box at the end. So education, work, and learning. And by constructing that model in the industrial era, what we did is we completely failed at preparing people for a world of exponential change.
Yeah, in some ways it's the exact opposite, right? We wanted people to sit down, shut up, follow instructions, do it the same way every time, execute it perfectly, basically be a cog in an industrial machine that's entirely known and predictable. And now we're asking people to do the exact opposite. It's variable, it's unpredictable, we don't know. What are you going to do when you're exception handling, when you're coming across things you've never encountered before? Jean Piaget, a developmental psychologist, said, intelligence is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. And we're seeing that is increasingly so important, and it is the opposite of what many people have been taught to do. So it's no wonder it's a big shock to the system.
I mean, for me, I think the key to effective learning is sort of what you said. If you can give people new concepts, they have to put it into play right away. And so I think, again, that's done well professionally, that works super well. But again, for education institutions which have a certain efficiency, we just have to get much better at moving people from concept to application so that they internalize how you do that.
And also, I think it's really important for people that came up through the education system as you were describing. I mean, they themselves need to actually unlearn a whole bunch of things before they can learn. They learned that system, that very structured set of processes, and they often became very successful, especially if they get tenure. And what we're finding, I mean, you know, Singularity University is basically all adjunct faculty. What you're finding is that you want people that are really, really deeply knowledgeable about a particular topic and are continually connected to the way that that particular information is used, and carrying that information back and forth to the learner and making it a much more focused set of learnings, as opposed to the traditional model, which, you know, Esther Wojcicki, a friend who wrote Moonshots in Education, calls the sage on the stage. That model has to go away because it actually is not calibrated to helping you to get success.
The lecture is dying, right? Professors love the lecture because they get to stand up and wax philosophical about all they know, but it doesn't actually result in meaningful, impactful learning. And as you were pointing to, what meaningful and impactful learning requires is doing it, and doing it in as close to real time and as close to the real life context as possible, right? Practicing it, putting into practice.
So just maybe to wrap up, I mean, Singularity is known to bring a sort of positive orientation to all these changes. And again, the education system, we could talk about all the challenges and all the depression. Just share a little bit, what makes you maybe optimistic around how this might go positive over the next decade?
You want to go first?
So I would say cautiously optimistic. People ask me all the time about issues related to the future of work is, do we have to help sort of upgrade and develop human beings much more rapidly and help them to continually be effective, or do we have to change the system? And the answer is yes. You must change the system so that it is much more responsive to this constant process. I always say, you know, with educational institutions, what kind of business treats you for 4 years as a customer and the rest of your life as a cash register? They must become a lifelong learning platform. So the system itself must change. And then for individuals, we have to continually give them the information and resources they need so they can continually adapt, to learn how to learn on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think lifelong learning is critical. And I personally am excited about technology that can facilitate personalized learning paths. You know, up until the present day, you have 30 students plus in a classroom all moving through the same content, the same pace, regardless of their prior knowledge, regardless of their particular skill at it. But with technology getting better, we have the opportunity to personalize pathways and to have diverse specialization based on people's particular talents and interests, and we can have more creativity, more innovation. So I don't want to say that the technology alone will solve that, because it never will. But in conjunction with great teachers and great pedagogy, the technology can help make that more possible.
Tell you, share what I find positive in all this. I think with all the discussion around machine learning, humans are by nature very competitive. And with all the discussion around computer learning, we're seeing more emphasis on human learning. And maybe we're going to start tackling some of the problems in the system that we've known about for a long time and haven't really had the will to make the change. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating conversation around the future of learning at the Singularity University Global Summit.